Harbor. This is the same woman who, about 3 months before she made that statement, had said that we have Iraq very well under control, that their threats are modest. Actually, Colin Powell said roughly the same thing several months before. But what happened apparently is that in the interim, Bush and company decided they were going to go to war in Iraq. So they had to make Iraq into a real menace.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
پس از افغانستان نوبت به عراق رسید و جنگی در گرفت که طی یک دهه بیش از 1 میلیون قربانی بر جای گذاشت. جنگی که با بهانه سلاح‌های کشتار جمعی آغاز شد و البته هرگز سلاح کشتار جمعی در این کشور پیدا نشد. نکته قابل توجه گزارش بازرسان سازمان انرژی اتمی مبنی بر عدم وجود این سلاح‌ها پیش از آغاز جنگ بود.
You have to call everything we do a victory, so it's called a victory. In fact, the Iraq War was a tremendous defeat for the United States. Now, you can see it. There's another thing that the press won't talk about.
What I meant by truth and consequences is that there is this sort of fabricated truth, and what usually happens if you put it in the context of how nations go to war, but in particular with the United States, is that we don't question once a decision has been made, and that decision could be made by just a few individuals. Look at how Congress responded in the lead up to the war in Iraq, where nobody was questioning that, and those were elected members of both the Democratic and Republican Party.
You go back a couple of years, 2007, the majority of Americans were opposed to any threats. In fact, their opinions were pretty much the same as Iranians. There was a joint poll of Iranian American public opinion that came out almost the same. I haven't seen a recent poll, but I'm sure if you took one now, it would be totally different. There's been massive propaganda identifying Iran as the major threat to world order. And it's quite interesting to see how, and this is trumpeted all over the place. Well, you know, suppose we had, imagine a free press somewhere. It's impossible to imagine, but let's do a thought experiment. First question they'd ask is, what's the Iranian threat? It's not asked, but it's answered. It's not asked, but it's answered. And that's not reported.
Hey, well, look, when it comes to propaganda, if it worked well the first time, why wouldn't you use the same recipe? I mean, if you brought out something that turned out to be untrue, say missing weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, how many people really pay much attention to that? There's no difference. Iran, Iraq, I mean, for a lot of people, they're not really educated on the differences. They hear that you've got yet another rogue nation, part of the axis of evil. There are sort of these slogans that we hear. Now that we've taken care of Saddam Hussein, well, where's the other rogue state? It has to be Iran.
We should have bombed somebody in Iran, then we'd bring them to the table, just like President Nixon did to the Vietnamese.
Well, a militia group linked to terror being backed by Iran and setting up camp on America's doorstep.
Al-Qaeda in Iran. These people are out to kill us.
People don't understand the danger that this country poses to the world.
10 kilotons in a refrigerator in a cargo container could kill 1 million people.
It is too late to stop Iran's nuclear program.
They're at war now.
The attacks are connected to Al-Qaeda, but is Iran pushing the terror buttons?
It's a very easy formula to turn this entire nation into a nation that is worthy for a massive bombing or, for taking out in some way. So what Cy Hirsch was saying is that propaganda is a technique, and if the technique works, and if you have a population that's been so conditioned to go along with the narrative, the master narrative, then why bring out something different? Just turn that country into something that's unworthy. And the best way to do that is to say that they have this terrible leadership, because the people are often lost in the mix. We forget that there are people with the same aspirations that you and I have that live within that country. We have to turn that country into a product, and the product is something to be taken off the shelves.
In fact, one of the charges against Iran now, one of the reasons why it's called the major threat to world peace, is that it's trying to expand its influence in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's called destabilizing. When Iran expands its influence into neighboring countries, that's destabilizing. When the U.S. invades and occupies and destroys them, that's stabilizing.
With respect to Iran, for example, there's a build-up now toward a war with Iran. What must we do? We must present Iran as a very, very serious threat. We must therefore de-emphasize the fact that, in fact, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, whereas, in fact, the United States has thousands of them, and Israel has several hundred of them. And we have to ignore the fact that the United States and Israel have both really seriously threatened Iran.
There again, I don't think that we're being well educated about what's happening there internally, but we are being conditioned, though, to accept the possibility of some strike. And who knows when that might happen, if it will happen, but the conditioning is there to turn it into a place that is where it's okay to have some enormous bombing, some taking out, not just of a nuclear capability, but where there could be incredible loss of life potentially.
Every year, the Pentagon and the intelligence community present analyses to Congress of global security. They did it last April, and of course there was a section on Iran. They make it they're very explicit. They say there's no military threat. They said Iran has very low military expenditures by standards of the region. It has very limited capacity to deploy force. Its strategic doctrine is aimed at holding off invasions. They said if they're developing a nuclear capability, they don't say yes or no, but if they are, it would be part of their deterrent strategy. Well, if any country needs a deterrent, that's the one. That's the military threat. But then they go on to say that, yes, it's the major threat to world order. Why? Because it's destabilizing neighboring countries. It's trying to expand its influence. You can't do that. We own the world. You can't interfere with us.
When you look around the world, change is happening in places where people are giving up paying with their lives. And an example, of course, in the Middle East. I don't think that the United States has really been out front on working with people in the Middle East with this Arab Spring moment. There's no going back from that, and it's an incredible change in people with their own media even, and these are people who really do pay a much greater price in many respects because of the kind of regimes that they have. So we were behind that curve. We are not the great example to the rest of the world now, and they're looking for examples elsewhere.
غرب و در رسانه‌ها